So, hi, and welcome to a free Confidence on Camera lesson on Wednesday, April the 22nd. I'm Michael Bean, and today we are talking about story. So, a quick recap in those first couple of minutes of the kind of fundamental questions that I think are the most effective, the ones that I use anyway when I'm approaching story. Is we start with what's the story the writer's telling. And so that involves looking at the style, looking it up on IMDb or YouTube, getting some sense of what's happening there, going carefully through the script for details. And then inside of that, going, well, what story do I want to tell? Because as we saw with the Georgie script that we looked at, was it last week, a week before, that there are a number of angles that you can take into any script. And so it starts with, what story is the writer telling? What story do I want to tell? And then it moves into character. At least, so who are the characters? What are the words that I would use to describe my character? What words would I use to describe that other character? What's the relationship between them, or the emotional relationship? And then that takes us into one of the most effective tools that I use for helping actors not just understand story, but bring story into their bodies and bring it into their work in class or in coachings, which is, what do you want to make the other person do or feel? And so that we have concrete examples, and so that I can show you how that tool works, we're going to go over some scripts, and then I'm going to show you what several actors did with them. So we're going to look at Josh, who's been joining us for some of the lessons, worked with me this morning, and we went over a script from movie feature called The Secret of Skeleton Island. And then Taylor, who also has been joining the sessions and is Josh is in my teens class on Saturdays right now. And Taylor has been taking my Monday night class for adults. And so Taylor and I workshopped several scenes from a Lifetime or maybe Hallmark style movie called Horses of McBride. And so we'll look at those two one after the other. I believe I've got them both ready for you here. I do, yes. Good. And so the first one we'll look at is The Secret of Skeleton Island. Now, this, one of the things that's interesting about this one, I think, is that it's got a lot of physicality to it. So we talked about this on Monday. Interior elevator shaft day. 3 boys, Pete, Bob, and Jupiter, lie at the bottom of an elevator shaft. Their legs and arms bound securely with rope as an elevator high above them descends steadily towards them. The boys are 10 to 12 years old. Jupiter Jones, the stocky, brainy leader of the group, lies coolly gauging the time left before impact. Bob Andrews, blonde-haired and smallest of the 3, looks about through a thick pair of glasses for any possible means of escape. Pete Crenshaw, the athletic one of the 3, is trying to frantically wiggle about in his rope, trying to free himself. So Pete these are the audition sets for Pete. So the athletic one, frantically wiggling in his rope. Bob, we've got the nerdy guy. And Jupiter Jones, stocky, brainy leader, coolly gauging the time left. Man, it's bad. Worst yet, we're going to get crushed, not for 47 more seconds. We're going to die in 47 seconds. Balderdash, the 3 investigators have never lost a case yet. We're not going to now. Okay, so Jupiter, who we already read, is coolly gauging the time. Bob has been looking around the bottom of the shaft and he spotted something. I knew it. I've been researching elevators. I remember in my notes. This isn't time for stupid research notes, Bob. Bob hurt. The notes say there's always a fire axe in the shaft. It's over there. Okay, so Bob does know what he's talking about. He points with his head. Can you get to it, Pete? Pete glances down at his watch. I'll have to. Pete rises on his 2 bound feet and hops over painfully to the fire axe. He nearly loses his balance halfway, teetering precariously for a precious second, but then resumes hopping. He reaches the fire axe and tries to grab it, but his hands are tied too securely to his body. Right. So you've got the elevator, 47 seconds before it crushes you. The hands are tied, hopping over. He turns, positioning the blades of the axe against the rope. Bob peers down. Hurry, Pete. We've got 22 seconds left. Da-da-da, miscalculation, haha, 15 seconds, rope's coming loose. Axe blade cuts through the last strands of the rope. Grabs the fire axe, turns to the others. I'll cut you free. No time, cut the counterweight rope. Pete gapes at him. That'll make the elevator fall faster. Exactly, cut the rope now. 7 seconds. 5, 4, 3. Ah! Bob screams at Jupiter, you're crazy! Swings the fire axe at the rope. Rope breaks. Elevator falls double speed. Grinding noise. Elevator stops. Fraction of an inch above their heads, right? So you know this kind of show. Remember the characters are supposed to be 10 to 12. And so that means that the audience is substantially younger than that. I believe I talked about this several weeks ago when I was talking about understanding style, but shows are often written for the aspirational age of the characters. Or for the audience, for the aspirational age. So aspire, it's like how old they want to be. And so if your characters are 10 to 12, then probably your audience is like 6 or 7. So that means that there is no chance of these guys actually getting squished by an elevator. I mean, like, think about watching one of these shows. Like, you're watching it and they're going to make it really tense, but you're not going to be there going like, oh my God, what happens when they're all like crushed into bloody pulp? Like, that's just not going to happen in a kid's show like this. And so knowing that helps you make some of the stylistic choices. Now, with this 3 investigators thing, we actually can go on IMDb and look up the style. Now, remember, if you were auditioning for something like this and there wasn't a previous 3 investigators movie, then what you might have to do is go into IMDb and look up the director or the producer and see the last projects they worked on and just take your best guess. But in this case, because this is an older project, we can just pull up the 3 investigators. And so I queued up the first part of the trailer for you.
Next, we have a lovely oil painting. We'll start at $20,000. $100,000. I beg your pardon?
300, 400, it doesn't matter. It's still a bargain, and I'll prove it.
Oh, no!
A self-portrait by Rembrandt. Reported stolen from this gallery 6 months ago.
But the ingenious truth is that the painting never left this building.
Who are you?
We're the 3 investigators.
You'll never guess in a million years where we're going next. South Africa.
Sounds to me like a code white.
So you get the feel of the show. That's like, oh, okay, these 3 are going to like use their skills and they're going to solve all the things, and so you know the audience is quite young. And so we start with like understanding the story that's on the page, and then understanding as much as we can the story that the writer wants to tell. And then start making your own choices about it. Okay, like what's your version of Pete, right? If you're playing Pete, we know that Pete's the athletic one, he's frantically wiggling, but like what's the story here? And so I talked to Josh about it. He's like, I just got kind of Indiana Jones vibe from it. I was like, okay, great. Like that's the story that Josh wanted to tell. They're like, he's Indiana Jones. He's like the heroic explorer. He's gonna like do things. I think that's a totally valid take on this. And if we were doing the exercise where I asked all of you to chime in, I'm sure we can find 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 other versions of Pete that are just as valid, that still fit the facts that we've got. We've got to figure out your angle in. We move on to characters and the relationships between them. And why don't I show you Josh's first take of this scene first, and then we'll talk about it. So let me just, got it right here.
Oh man, this is bad. This is the worst yet. We're gonna get crushed.
47 more seconds if my calculations are correct.
Great. We're gonna get crushed in 47 seconds.
Hold back. The 3 investigators have never lost a case yet. We're not going to now. I've been researching elevators, and I remember in my notes.
This is not the time to be doing your stupid research notes, Bob.
The note said there's always a fire axe in the shaft. It's over there. Can you get to it, Pete?
I'll have to. Reach it.
All right, Pete, we've got 22 seconds left. Seems like I made a slight arithmetical miscalculation. I forgot to factor in inertial momentum. It's actually 15 seconds.
The rope's getting loose. I'll cut you guys free.
No, I've cut the counterweight rope.
Well, that'll just make the elevator go fall down faster.
Exactly. Cut the rope now. 7 seconds. 5, 4, 3.
You're crazy.
The safety governor senses when the elevator moves too fast and activates the emergency brakes. Simple but elegant design.
Just get out of here.
Okay, so that was the first take of the scene. And you can see that the physicalities are really there. You know, those things that we were talking about on Monday, where you have to be creative about bringing it in. If we look at the script, there's substantially more physicality written there into the script. Right there, they're bound securely. They're lying on the bottom of the elevator shaft. You wouldn't want to do that in an audition, obviously, because you wouldn't want to be laying on the floor. You know, there's all of this business here where he hops over painfully to the fire axe and almost loses his balance, and all of that just got condensed into like hop hop. You know, Josh's choice was to have an object to use as the fire axe, and he just kept it in his hands behind his back. I think you could also this scene would work just fine if you stayed close enough that you could keep the fire axe just down below the frame. If it was down here, oh, I saw my hand, down here, we'd never have to know. You know, so same. If it, in this case, because his hands were bound behind his back, it was easy for him to hold the object. You know, so that's the camera piece of it. But the understanding story piece of it, you can, I don't know if you can see in this, but one of the places that I thought there was a real opportunity for growth in the scene, it was in those relationships. So remember, once we understand the story, then it's like, what are the relationships? And so I started by asking Josh, okay, who is Jupiter to you? And we talked a little bit about them. You know, we've got these descriptions here: the brainy leader, the nerdy guy, the emotional tone that came across in that first take was panic. You know, it wasn't Indiana Jones, even though that Josh's like really clear, strong idea of the story he wanted to tell was Indiana Jones. You know, what came through was like, oh my God, we're gonna die, which is so easy to fall into with a script like this, because that's almost what's written into it, right? This is the worst yet. We're gonna get crushed. We're gonna die. It says it right there in his second line. You know, and so easy to fall into that if you're just kind of going intuitively. This is why thinking about story and having some kind of structure for like, what are the decisions that I need to make about story? How do I want to think about story? Can be really helpful. Yeah, I absolutely believe in approaching the work from like, okay, what if I was really there and it was really happening? That can be useful exercise, but very often the character's experience of what's happening is different from yours. And so we started by playing with those relationships. We added a couple of physical adjustments that you're going to see in his second take. I got him to start further back from the camera. I said, hold your wrist behind you and just actually struggle against your own wrist. So instead of like showing us struggling, you're just actually pulling against yourself, and that'll do some of it. We looked at the IMDb video, discussed how the audience is really young and probably like nobody's going to die here. And then the piece that I really wanted to go over today is, how do you want them to, what do you want to make that person do or feel? And so in sort of more academic script analysis methods, objective is a big deal. And I think it is a big deal. It's because it takes the work from here inside you and puts it out on the other person. And it's easy to look at a script and get stuck in, well, here's how my character is feeling. And remember from some of the confidence talks that we've had, that when your focus is inward directed, your work does not appear confident. You seem like very concerned about creating something over here. What we want is to shift your focus outside of you as much as possible. And this is where objective takes all those things you know about story and character and then brings them together, or can bring them together in a really simple way. So it's like, once you understand who Jupiter is, and who Bob is and who Pete is, then the question is, what if you're playing Pete, what do you want to make Jupiter do or feel? And Josh's first impulse was like, I don't know. Like, I know what Jupiter wants to make me feel. He wants to make me feel like, we're like, it's going to be fine. And so we followed a little bit and found, I think Josh chose something like, take this seriously, right? That he wants to make that he wants to make Jupiter feel a little scared, so that so do or feel, he wants to make him feel a little bit scared, so that he gets them out of this. And so I like, once we've got that in that sort of academic language, I want to make you scared so you get us out of this. If I say that to you, it doesn't really do anything for me. And so that's why I always follow it then into plain language. And I just try a couple of different things out loud. And the one that seemed to work for Josh was, take this seriously. Now, again, if you're going to go into a more academic form of script analysis, you'd talk about tactics or verbs, or one of these words that helps us understand that there are a whole bunch of different ways to scare somebody else. And there are a whole bunch of different ways, to try and make your friend get you out of this situation. And you don't want to shut down any of those. This is why choosing a feeling is like taking blue and painting the entire scene blue. You lose a lot of the depth. This is where objective is really useful, because take this seriously. It can be like, take this seriously. And it can also be like, take this seriously. And I'll be like, oh, take this seriously. And there are 1,000 different take this seriouslys. And that's where I feel like objective is very useful. And those of you who've been in class with me have seen me do this with students over and over and over again, to follow the ideas until we get to that plain language objective. And then I'm like, say that out loud. Does it fire you up? Does it make you feel more into the story? And are we still supporting the story the writer wants to tell? Are we still supporting the story you want to tell? Great. Let's just take that into the scene. So with all of that, here's what we got from Josh in his last take.
Oh man, this is bad. This is the worst yet. We're gonna get crushed.
Not for 47 more seconds if my calculations are correct.
Great. We're gonna die in 47 seconds.
Balderdash, the 3 investigators have never lost a case yet. We're not going to now. Oh, I knew it. I've been researching elevators. I remember in my notes.
It's not the time to do your stupid research notes, Bob.
The note said there was a fire exit in the shaft. It's over there. Oh, can you get to it, Pete?
I'll have to. I can't grab it.
Right, we've got 22 seconds left. I seem like I made a slight miscalculation. I forgot to factor in inertial momentum. It's actually 15 seconds.
Rope's getting loose. I'll set you guys free.
There's no time. Cut the counterweight rope.
But the elevator is just gonna fall faster.
Exactly. Cut the rope now. 7 seconds. 5, 4, 3.
You're crazy.
The safety governor senses when the elevator moves too fast and activates the emergency brakes. Simple but elegant design.
Let's just get out of here.
All right, and so much more layered, much more nuanced. I mean, the bones of the scene were all there in the first take. Now we're layering in more of the story. And some of the adjustments were as simple as sort of not shouting the entire time. Right? But knowing why and knowing where we're taking that from, I think helps you make the changes from the inside instead of making the changes externally. So, everybody still with me on this one? Yeah? Okay, good. So that was The Secret of Skeleton Island. Now we're going to look at Horses of McBride. Now, one of the reasons that it is useful to look at these Hallmark movies and Lifetime movies is that there are 100 or more of them that shot in Vancouver last year. Just like an enormous number of these movies get made. One of the things that came up when I was talking to Taylor about it is similar to what I said about The Secret of Skeleton Island. Who is the audience for this? Right. So if The Secret of Skeleton Island, is for the characters are 10 to 12 and the audience is like 6 or 8, then any of these Hallmark Lifetime movies, they're typically, their target audience is typically older and conservative. You know, and I don't mean conservative in like a deeply political sense. I mean like the conservative in the sense of like they're not, you know, wild and weird. You know, this is so if you think of your grandparents, this you know, or that can often be a good benchmark. You're like, oh right, this is made for whether or not maybe your grandparents are like too weird to, you know, to really like those things. I mean, I say weird in full acknowledgement that like I like weird people. I'm weird. You know, like I think artists are weird. I get actors in my classes all the time with these movies who really judge them, you know, and who read them and think, like this is bad writing, and that's not helpful for you if you're doing a performance. One of the things that I really recommend over and over again is, especially when you read something and you're like, I don't really like this. The most useful way to think about it as an actor, if you're preparing for a professional performance, is this is exceptionally good writing for an audience that's not me. You're like, somebody really knows what they're doing. Like I mean, if it's going all the way to production, you know, it is beat out many, many, many other scripts, right? Somebody's putting their money into making this thing. They're pretty sure there's an audience for it. And if that audience is not you, that's fine. Hopefully, every professional actor is willing to work on a show where the audience is not you, right? Maybe you love serious stuff, but would you turn down doing children's theater? Like would be too bad, because that can be really, really fun. Like maybe you only like comedy, but would you turn down, you know, acting in a serious dramatic series? Hopefully not, you know, because you would grow and learn in that process. So let's look a little bit more quickly at Horses of McBride. I'll share the script with you. So, Horses of McBride. The character is Monica. Actually, maybe what we'll start with is the log line of the show, yeah, so that you can get a sense of what. Okay, stop. Horses of McBride. When Nikki discovers 2 horses stranded deep in the Rocky Mountain snow, she is determined to find a way to set them free. Right? Like even just looking at the poster, gives you a sense of the style of the show. Right? Not difficult. And yes, if this was brand new, maybe we wouldn't have the poster here yet. But you could look at the poster for the last couple of movies that this producer or this production company did, and be like, oh, okay, great. It's one of those. This is for like my grandparents, you know, or my grandparents' conservative friends. If we watch the first little.
It hasn't been easy with Stock Mills shutting down. A lot of people have had to move away.
Our horses are tired, our equipment's worn out. We are on the brink of bankruptcy.
Stop trying to tell me how to live my life, like you're making some outstanding job of your own.
I saw 2 horses stuck on a piece of alpine, completely snowed in.
And that's the show. Right, like that's this movie is, you know, the small town, father-daughter, horses that are stuck in the snow, and then the community has to come together to save the horses. It's like feel good, straightforward. Now the character that we're looking at, Monica, is a smaller supporting character. And you'll see that she has like a specific function in the show. So these are the actual audition sides. I deleted one of the scenes because I knew we weren't going to have tons of time to look over it. So starts here. And each script is, these markings are typically made by casting. And so pay attention to them, right? If something is crossed out, read it anyway, because it's going to give you information about the script. It keeps you from having to make stuff up. Hi, is that your dad? Yeah, you know him. We met kind of once. She adds a smirk. It was not a congenial meeting. If you didn't know what the word congenial meant, it would take you 10 seconds to look it up on your computer. So easy. If you were prepping this, there would be no excuse showing up for class or for the audition without having looked up the word congenial, unless you were like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means. well, we're going to clear off a landing pad for the helicopter. Nikki and Fiona, you do that. Give these two messages, massages to improve their circulation and stimulate the healing process. Nick nods. Monica approaches Matt, who's unloading wood and food. Remember me? How could I forget? Still eat wild meat when you're hungry and cut down trees, Mr. Davidson. Still handcuff yourself logging trucks. Would if there were any around, but I guess my side won that round. Okay, so conservative, traditional. Monica's there here in the story to be the like fierce activist. You still eat wild meat, right? Yeah, and cut down trees. She's there to like show up and be judgmental of people who hunt, who cut down trees. And we're establishing that she's the kind of like fierce activist who handcuffs herself to logging trucks. Okay, good. All of that is here in the first scene. I'll show you Taylor's first crack at it. And you'll see that and you'll see why with the first scene especially, we stopped and we did this exercise, which I talked about last time, which I owe to Kirsten Clarkson, who is fantastic, which is write the breakdown for the character, right? So she said fierce, confident, witty, aggressive, sensitive, and then we worked that in and then followed that those character choices into the opinion about Matt, right? So that strong feeling or opinion about the other character, she really had it right from the beginning. And then she talked to me about how she was struggling to like really connect to it emotionally. She's like, it's there, but like, how do I get it here? And so we followed it through from character, strong feeling or opinion, and into what do you want to make the other person do or feel? And she said, I want to scare him, right? And so we follow. As we played with that, some plain language version. The language warning is coming up, and ultimately we played with you're a piece of shit, and so that's we went back and forth. And she was like, yeah, and once she found that, and got that in her body, then the scene really came alive. So let me show you the first take of Taylor's scene. Now, I made a novice Zoom error and forgot to pin her video. So unfortunately, you're going to see me just like being neutral and reading, but you will have to trust me that Taylor was doing great reactions. I just managed to not record them. Oops.
Hi, is that your dad?
Yeah,
We met, kinda, once.
Well, we're going to clear the landing pad for the helicopter. You do that. We're going to get these two massages to improve the circulation and simulate the healing process.
See, while I was doing that, Taylor was great.
Remember me?
How could I forget?
You still eating wild animals and cutting down trees, Mr. Davidson?
Still handcuff yourself to logging trucks?
I would if they were around, but I guess my side won that round.
Right, and so Taylor's ideas about this were super clear. We just needed to find a way to get more of it into her body, and so that's
Action.
where we ended up with this. Oops, that's not the right one. That's scene 3. We'll look at that in a minute. Is this it?
Action.
Hi. Is that your dad?
Yeah,
We met once, kinda.
Well, we're going to clear off the landing pad for the helicopter. You do that. We're going to give these two messages to improve the circulation and stimulate the healing process.
Remember me?
How could I forget?
And so the part that you didn't see there was, Taylor, what we got was her to like put all her focus on the guy who was the one who she wanted to affect and walk up to him. And so there was this brief line off to the side, and then the eye line is the person she's talking to, and she walks up there. Newbie Zoom mistake.
Still eat wild meat when you're hungry and cut down trees, Mr. Davidson?
Right? And so you can see it like it's that was already present in the first one. The first one just came across with that like the fierce, the aggressive, you know, and also just a mix of like Taylor, who's a nice person, you know, and was doing some of the like, if I'm really there and it's really happening. And so it took finding something that felt real, you know, and then get it into her body, you know, to get that piece of the scene.
Self-logging trucks?
Yeah, I would if they're already around. But I guess my side won this argument.
And then just for fun, you know, we're not going to spend a lot of time with it, but the third scene this is one of those ones like the ones that I looked at on Monday, where there's just an enormous amount of action written in that is so hard to do, right? So what we can assume is that in between these, there's a second scene that I didn't show you where Monica's like, wow, the wolves, they're so amazing. The exterior forest below the horse's night, primal scream, the sound of barking, growling of a wolf pack. He grabs a burning log and runs charging down the hill. Monica, who's pictured 10 to the distance away, is dragging a wolf that has her leg in its jaws, right? Can you imagine? Like, this is what you're asked to do in the audition. She falls down and it's all over her, but Mac whacks it with his burning weapon. The wolf lets go with a yelp, but doesn't retreat. It turns ready to attack again. Another wolf comes out of nowhere and jumps on Matt, sinking his teeth into his shoulder, but Nikki's there and whacks the animal. Meanwhile, the first wolf pursues Monica, who's screaming. Matt grabs it by the scruff of the neck and pushes the burning log against its head. The smell of burning hair makes the animal release. Nikki and Matt both yell and wave their smoking logs at the wolves, who eventually retreat. My recommendation, if you remember from Monday, was first try exactly what's written there, if you can. And so we played with that a little bit. And I want to show you sort of what we got. Okay. Oops. Okay, hang on. Technology.
Action.
There, that's the right one. Right, so here's the start of the first take of the scene. Just and I'll just show them to you quickly so you can see the difference.
Man, oh man, thought I was gonna die. I feel their breath on me.
Okay, and here's the take that we got at the end. So a lot of that is just about your raw physical commitment, but I think that it takes a fairly substantial understanding of camera technique and then adding the story on top. With the third scene, it was mostly physical commitment. We didn't go into like, how do you want to make the wolves do or feel? What do you want to make the wolves do or feel? It was just like this. What this needs is more of that adrenaline right off the top, and then you can just ride that right through the scene. So we approached it physically. Okay, so I like looking at real scripts because I think it explodes the notion that every script will be able to apply the same perfect set of 6 bullet point questions. In broad strokes, my recap for understanding story is that you start with what story is on the page, what story is the writer telling, can you understand the style and the audience, and then what version of the story do you want to tell? And then you follow that into who are the characters, what are the relationships between them, what is your strong feeling or opinion about the other character, and then you follow that into this person who you have a strong feeling or opinion about, what do you want to make them do or feel? And then you put that into plain language and you just try saying it out loud a couple of times. And if it makes you feel, and if it fires you up and gets your attention out and into the scene, then it's the right choice for that moment. But that's the only way to test it. You can't know intellectually before you try it on in your body. At least that's my opinion. So that was our story lesson. Come back tomorrow. We're going to be talking about headshots and demo reels, and don't have a confirmed guest for our auditions lesson on Friday yet, but I will very soon.